All right, and we are live. You see live on your end, Dave?
I'm see you well.
Perfect. So, welcome everyone who is joining. Today, I'm excited because my guest is the president and owner of Coaching Actuaries. So, I wanted to welcome Dave Kester onto the channel. So, thank you for joining, Dave.
Hi, thanks. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So, if you could give us just like maybe just a quick couple sentence background about yourself, and then we'll kind of dive on in.
Sure. Well, I'm from Des Moines, Iowa, and I've lived in Iowa my whole life, so I guess I consider myself a true Iowa person, and been in the business of being an actuary since 1982. So I guess that means I'm a little old for many of you, but that's okay. I really enjoy what I do, and I'm excited to be here today.
Awesome. So let's kind of back up a little bit and kind of start out with when you first even heard about actuarial, and did you have any actuarial jobs before you started the company that you're at right now?
Sure. Yeah, this may sound like I'm really old, but I actually never heard about the actual profession until I was a sophomore in college. I went to UNI, which is
Okay.
in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and my degree was in math teaching. I always wanted to be a math teacher. That's all I knew. It's all I ever wanted to do. But then my sophomore year, something neat happened. They said, "Well, there's another option for math people if you could pursue an actuarial science career." And they actually gave us a tour of a company, an insurance company. We visited with actuaries. They showed us sample actuarial exams, and that was my first exposure to becoming an actuary. And it was really at that time I knew 100% that I did not want to become an actuary. And the reason why was I looked at the sample exams and I thought they were way too difficult. I could not do this stuff, so I'll just stick with being a math teacher.
Oh, that's funny.
But ironically, after I graduated, I started looking for a teaching job and I could not find one. And there was an opening for a local insurance company here in Des Moines, and I applied. I had an awful interview. I knew nothing about insurance, and I thought there's no way I'm getting this job, and yet they offered it to me. I don't know why.
Really?
I may have been the only one that applied. I don't know, but
What was awful about the interview?
it was in a very corporate world,
Yeah.
and it felt really stuffy, and I didn't feel comfortable at all. It just I felt like a fish out of water,
Yep.
and so it's like I could not even envision myself working at this company. And the guy that interviewed me just seemed to be very distant and not connecting well with you. Um, and so I just thought, wow, this was an awful interview. Um, but they offered me the job, and I was in a position where I really needed a job because I was engaged to get married, so I needed a job. So
Yeah.
you take the responsible option and you do it. But I thought, okay, I'll do this for 1 year. Then next year I'll get my teaching job, and we'll do that route. But I actually fell in love with taking exams and becoming an actuary, and so that was my history. Although it's funny, ironically, I didn't think I didn't think I could be successful at it.
That's amazing. So it sounds like that job worked out, even though you didn't think the interview went well.
It did, it ended up being a good, decent job, but I realized I started out in health insurance, and I realized I preferred to get into life insurance. And so there was an opening for another insurance company about 2 years later, and then I applied and
Okay.
got that job. And so one thing I learned in that was your first job is your most difficult job to get, and you never
Yes.
know what it's going to be, but you want to make sure you get a first job, and getting your second job is much easier than getting your first job.
I would agree with you. That's been my experience for sure. That
Mhm.
the first one was a lot harder and took more work and research and connections.
Right,
But
right.
after that, it becomes a lot easier.
Yep, correct. I
So,
agree with that.
so were you interested in math from a young age? It kind of sounds like you were. You wanted to be a teacher. Did that start when you were really young? Because some people, it's like from a very young age. Some people kind of discover that love for math later on.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's the one thing I've always remembered since I was a young kid was liking math. I can think back to my childhood, and I remember getting a stopwatch for Christmas. And, this is the olden days where it just was a stopwatch, but
Uh-huh.
I didn't have a regular watch or anything. And I thought that was so cool. I just timed everything, timed walking to my bedroom, timed walking to school, everything was measured. And I was a real geek, I guess. But that was one of the things that I thought was, just really neat because it gave me a chance to measure things. And then later I got a job at detasseling corn, which most Iowa people did way back then, where you just go in cornfields and you walk through them and you pull out tassels.
Oh,
And
no way.
it sounds boring, and it is, but it's not quite as simple as it looks because tassels can be hidden. And so the goal is to pull every tassel, but sometimes you miss some because they're hidden or whatnot. And then when a person comes in and checks you, they're going to count how many you miss. And that was my first introduction. As I got into that, I started realizing that was a binomial distribution. And I started,
did you know it was a binomial distribution at the time?
Well, I didn't when I did it as a high school, but then I went back as a college guy, and I became the checker.
Oh, wow.
That, and they could miss 5 out of 1,000 and then pass. But I started thinking about better mathematical models to come up with to measure that. And so in my head, as I'm walking through fields, I was, playing with a normal distribution and, just doing weird things like that, trying to improve detasseling corn. Of course, none of that came to be, but it occupied my mind as I was walking through the cornfields of Iowa.
That is amazing. I think your company is probably kind of a natural fit for you then.
Correct. Yeah, it is.
But I'm sure that people are probably curious and I'm curious myself now. I know a lot of actuaries that use coaching actuaries to study for exams, and it's it's such a great resource. And I'm curious, back when you were studying, I mean, I'm sure the internet wasn't as prevalent. I'm not saying you're old, but I'm just curious what materials you use and how hard was it to come by those back then?
Right. Yeah. When I first started, the lower level exams, it was a little more difficult, I think, for me because I didn't come from an actual science program. So I literally had to study everything on my own. And there really wasn't materials that I found useful or I wasn't aware of it. And I kind of don't remember too much even looking at materials, but I did have a buddy that I studied with, and Brian was his name. And we actually then started our company together and left our jobs together, but we studied together. So what we ended up doing was really come up with a process more than materials. And so we first used a third-party tool. It was a DOS-based software. And
oh, wow.
Many of you may not know what DOS was, but that's okay. It goes back there. But it just was like a fancy flashcard system. We put our study material in the software, and then we quizzed ourselves doing it. And then eventually we wrote our own software as we got to the upper level exams, and then used that. So it was more about us actively learning and coming up with a process in a way to learn better, study smarter. And so that was really what we did.
That's fascinating. So did you actually sell this software back then, or was the company you started with him different at the time?
Yeah. So then eventually I got my FSA, and then we took it from a software that was something we could just use and then try to make it professional grade. And then we did actually sell it, and we sold, we sold a significant number of it, but it never took off. But probably, a couple hundred or more used it, which was quite a bit back then. And seemed like many of them found it useful, but in today's standards, it was pretty basic.
Wow, that's amazing. So when you were looking at the material and putting it into your software, were you just going off of the syllabus that was released by Society? I don't know if it was Society of Actuaries back then.
It was correct.
But Society of Actuaries, and you kind of used that and then found your own textbooks at that point?
Right. Yeah. At first and this was more in the upper level exams, but I would take the material, and at first I just wrote notes and studied from the notes. And then I realized that I needed something better than just reading it from the notes. And that's where we came up with the software that what we did was we took the material and we took everything into a question and an answer format. And so we may have read something, and then we thought about, well, what would be a good question to ask on this material? And then so we wrote a question, and then we wrote the answer to that. And then our software would quiz us with those questions, and then we would just mentally answer the questions. And we had it set up so that the questions we didn't answer well, we got to see more frequently. And I was amazed that as I went through there, the first, second, and third time I saw something, I had struggled remembering it, but then all of a sudden, maybe the fourth time or so, it just clicked. And all of a sudden I just knew it. And I realized that was the key for me, was to see something 3 or 4 times before I would really get it. But I couldn't do that unless I had a way to, quickly drill myself on the material 3 or 4 times.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. I mean, that sounds like kind of the initial beginnings of Adapt a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Sure.
But so actually, kind of on this topic with you starting a company, what was it that really did it just kind of naturally start with studying with this guy Brian, or was there some sort of spark that you really wanted to be an entrepreneur and something sounded exciting about that? Kind of, did you have the idea like a while ago, or did it just kind of naturally develop?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. And this was in 1994. So my memory is not 100% here, but I do remember quite a bit of this because it was a big turning point in my life. I never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur back then, but I did think of myself as very much into education.
Yes.
So I really wanted to help people learn and find a better way to learn. And, I think back, it even really goes back to my parents. Both my parents were teachers, and they were excited about teaching, and they just loved kids. I knew a lot of my friends were parents were teachers, and they talked about their parents grumbling when they came home, and my parents didn't. They were glad to teach because they loved the kids. And so for me, it was always about teaching, and then being excited about helping others learn. And so that was kind of how I grew up in that environment. And so it just seemed natural to me to take this, what I saw as a problem of getting through the exams and coming up with a better way for other students to learn. And that was my passion. I could tell right away. I was really pumped up about that. And so even when I was working on my job, I was always thinking about better ways to develop a process for people to study. And so it was always on my mind to improve this learning aspect.
Wow. So when you first, you obviously had the passion for the learning side, but when you first started the company, I mean, it sounds like you had kind of a background in programming. What did it look like at the very beginning? Like, were you able to sell this on the web at that point, or was it more just connections that you had? And were you selling, like, did you actually have it on a disc or something like that?
Yeah. 3.5-inch floppy disks. I think there were maybe 3 of them it took to install it. And another interesting story, kind of a fun story, is one of the main reasons I did not get a teaching job back in college was they really wanted people to teach math and to be able to teach computer science.
Okay.
And at that time, I had almost no experience with computers. And so, yeah, the funny part of that story is that what kept me from getting my teaching job was my lack of computer skills. And yet what got me into my business was my computer skills.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So there's this gap here where it's like, okay, I went from knowing nothing to at least knowing enough to start a company. And what happened in between was I learned on the job. And
Okay.
my buddy that I mentioned, Brian, he was a double major in math and computer science. And so he was really good at it. And I basically just learned from him. We work at the same company. We were a department of essentially two, and plus our boss. And so we did everything together. And when we were given projects at work, instead of doing it literally by hand or maybe with a spreadsheet, we would say, well, what happens if we would put this into a database? We thought that that might be better. So, I wanted to learn what it was like to build a database. So I, asked Brian, can we do this in a database? He said, sure. Can we write code for this? He said, sure. And so we would do all those things to learn it. And so that's how I learned to program. And I really found that enjoyable. I loved programming. And so we built a VB program, and it was a Windows-based program. You installed it on your computer, and like I say, 3.5-inch floppy disk. There was another disk that had the study material. So it was a hard business because if there was any problems, you had to work with people one-on-one through customer support, which was difficult.
Yeah.
And if there was ever an update you needed to make to the system, you had to wait till 6 months till you send out the next system and fix it. So I knew that that was a labor intensive. And then I guess I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but when I started coaching actuaries, which was my third attempt, what got me back into it was that I could do it on the web. And I knew the web was a much better platform for this type of work.
That makes sense. So was coaching actuaries, did that name come about a little later on, or was that kind of from the beginning?
Yeah. So I started the company Salt Solutions, and it was both education and consulting. My colleagues, my friends of mine who knew my business, they said that my business really was consulting. My hobby was the education, because they knew I always did that when I had free time, but never really paid any bills, So 95% or more of the money came in from consulting.
Wow.
And then 5% was the education, but that's what I was excited about. So I had to pay the bills. I enjoyed the consulting. It was okay, but everything was one-offs. You do one consulting project, you get paid well, but then you're done, and all of a sudden you have nothing to really show for it. And I wanted to get a sustainable business where I could build every time something got better. So anyway, Salt Solutions is the official name of the company. Then when we started going with our third attempt with Adapt, I really wanted it to be more than just Adapt. And I realized Salt Solutions wasn't a good name. And so there was at that point in 2009, I believe, where I thought, the next 30 years, what is the company going to be like? And that's where I decided the name Coaching Actuaries was a best name for the company.
Yeah.
And so we rebranded as Coaching Actuaries in 2009. We still had consulting, so we left that at Salt Solutions, but then our education part got moved over to the brand Coaching Actuaries.
Okay. That's interesting. So when was it that you actually first quit your corporate job and left for Salt Solutions? Was that, were you kind of doing both for a while you were building the business?
For a very little part, it was kind of the 1994 era. So maybe 6 months in that period. And then I realized I needed to devote full time to this. And so that's when as another quick side story on that, our company was going through a lot of changes there. We got bought out, and so the culture changed, and I really wasn't happy with the new culture. And so it seemed like a negative thing. You lose a good culture, and you go to, I'm not saying a bad culture, it just wasn't my culture. So I was considering it as a really, kind of a down part of my career, but it ended up being a positive thing because it kind of encouraged me then to to start my company. And if I would have had the previous job where everything was going great, I may not have ever started the company because I enjoyed my day job.
Oh, I believe that. Yeah, that's interesting. And it's also really cool to hear about your how programming really helped you start it, because I feel
Mhm.
like, especially now, programming is such an essential skill for an actuary.
Yeah,
I found that I study math and computer science in school, and my computer science background has come in more handy almost than my math. I will say my math has come in more handy for the exams.
sure.
Um, but in terms of like my daily work, the programming experience has just been extremely beneficial, and it sounds like it has been for yourself as well.
Yeah, for me, it was my niche. And I think all actuaries, maybe my coaching tip is you really want to develop a niche in your career that uh, at the end of the day, what you want by the time you're maybe age 35 or so is you really want to be the best in the world at something in your
Yes.
career. And it sounds like too difficult of a task, but uh, it's not, because one way of doing that is to be the only one that does something. And so
Right.
you're the only one that does something by default, you're the best. And in our business, there's so many niches out there. You might not be the only one, but there might only be 3 or 4 people that do things. And for me, what allowed me to be successful consulting was I was really good with technology, and I understood what it meant to be an actuary. And so in my world, which was kind of Iowa, I may not have been the best in the world, but I was the only one in Iowa that focused on technology and actual science. And so when any of the insurance companies needed technology help that involved their actuarial functions, I was the only one they knew about, so they called
Yes.
me. And so I kind of understood the benefit of being the best at something. You don't have to market yourself; people just know you're the guy to call. And so, as you think about how you're wired and everything, try to find that little niche for yourself that you are really good at, and then other people will contact you. Even if you don't start a company, you want to be that in your own company that you're currently working at, because if something changes, you need to change jobs or whatever. There's no security with your company. But if you're the best at something, that's how you get job security.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I actually read in a book, I can't remember what book it was, but they said if you don't feel like you can find your niche in one subject area, pick 3 different things and you can become the best in the world at that combination. So let's
Yeah.
say it's actuarial, technology, and I don't know, let's throw something else out there, coffee. I mean, that probably
Uh-huh.
wouldn't work with the combo, but if you somehow combine those 3 into some skill, there's probably no one else in the world that's going to be really good at that combination of 3, even though there's experts in each area.
Exactly. Yeah. No,
So
that you hit the nail on the head there. And for those that are looking for jobs, you're not at that position now. So you can't say, well, I'm the best at something, but you could start having a vision of where you want to get to. And in the interview process, if you could articulate that vision, you will stand out in the interview process from all your other candidates. And they will see that, oh, wow, this person really knows where they want to go, and that is the right path to get there. And so I think that could even be an opportunity to get a job, is if you could start having some sort of idea about your future now. Even though you're not there now, you could start planning for that.
definitely, I would agree with that. Um, so for yourself, you obviously kind of had a vision from the beginning. Can you give us a feeling for some of the challenges you've experienced in developing a company and being an entrepreneur, kind of going out on your own?
Sure. The first 15 years, ups and downs. It seemed like I had one year I had, fantastic year, and then the next year was like flat, barely making, breaking even, and then the next year, high profits. Next year, flat. So
Yeah.
it was. I worked in my basement. I had a couple employees, and we had a lot of fun. We really did. We were small. We were nimble. We enjoyed working, but there wasn't a lot of. If I could see work out like 1 month in advance, I was really happy. It's like, wow, I got work for a whole month. I don't have to worry about payroll
Yes.
for a whole month. And so that's what it was for 15 years. And, I had a family of 6 and I was the only
Wow.
breadwinner. So, there was a lot of pressure for me to provide for that. So it was a challenge to do that, but it was a fun journey. And that's how it went from 94 to 2009. And then, we rebranded Coaching Actuaries, and it really started from zero, but then it went up steadily from the very beginning. And by the time 2014, we decided to try to get completely out of consulting, and that's taken a while. And Ironically, it's been more difficult getting out of consulting than I ever dreamed of, because it was so hard to get into consulting.
Yep.
You get those jobs, and now all of a sudden you want to stop doing them. It's been more of a challenge than I thought, but hey, I guess that's a good problem to have.
That is a good problem to have. Ironically, 2014 is when I first heard about your company, because that's when I actually I started exams a while before that, and then I kind of jumped back into exams again after a break, and that's when I jumped back in, and someone's like, "Oh, you should try out this this Coaching Actuaries thing," and that's when I first heard about you guys. So
Right, yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not in my basement now.
yeah, I know.
We actually moved twice. We moved into our office, and then we moved and like quadrupled our office in about 3 years. We went into our current office, and we've got about 30 employees, and so we're at a right size right now where I'd like to be.
That's great. Was it a strange feeling going from your basement to like an office environment?
It was, yeah. You do that for 15 years. It had its advantages because we homeschooled, and so I saw my kids and my wife all day long, and I kind of
Yeah.
missed, going away and then having to come home. But it was time to do that. We actually had 5 people working in our basement, and
Oh, wow.
and my wife said, "Dave, maybe we ought to think about getting an office." And I said, "You're right, honey." So we did. That, and then about, like I say, 3 or 4 years later, we realized that we'd outgrown that spot. So now we're in a really good place.
That's great. So now that we discussed some of the challenges of your journey, can you tell us some of the positives and what you see as like the great parts of entrepreneurship and building a company?
Yeah, I wish people could just be with me for a day, not because they find it, I don't know, amazing or whatever, but just to see, I don't know, how much fun I have at work. And that, to me, I don't have work anymore. So I get to work. I'm in a position now where I can work when I want, but I still end up doing stuff for Coaching Actuaries a lot. I enjoy starting my day, writing stuff that's going to prepare me for teaching an exam. I love that process. But I'm fortunate. I've got a team of 30 that are doing all of the difficult things that I don't have to do, and I can just choose the parts that maybe are unique, that are for me, and I pass a lot of the heavy lifting onto them. And so, what a dream job I've got, that, I get to work with 30 people I love working with every day. We've got a great team atmosphere. We have a lot of fun. I've got some of my family that works with me, and the rest of the staff feel like family. So
That's amazing.
yeah, I'm not overemphasizing this enough. It's just, I am so thankful for what I get to do.
I believe it.
It's I don't feel like, there's very few things that I feel like, oh, I feel like I'm working now, or this is hard. Not that there's not challenges, but they're fun challenges. And so I feel bad when I talk to people that hate going to work.
Yes.
And I never really hated going to work, but I certainly, there's some of it that felt like work and that was more difficult. But now, I'm just in my sweet spot.
That's amazing. And you kind of followed that original passion of teaching, which is what you always wanted to do, and running a company. So that's
Yeah.
kind of a
Yeah.
perfect place to be.
Yeah, I did. I circled back to now being in education and combine actual science with technology with education. So all three of those are working together. And and I think that the key to all that is understanding. That's just me. That's who I am. Everyone else is wired differently. So we all need to find out what is those passions. And
Yes.
you may not be able to get that dream job right away, but you can work towards it.
Right. And that can be very helpful later on in what you end up doing. So kind of diving into the company itself, and at least I'm curious, I'm sure some other actuaries are curious, is how do the SOA will change exams every so often, as we know they did lately. How do you guys stay up to date with those changes? I'm sure that's a challenge. And are you able to go back and I don't even know. Are you able to like retake an exam to see what it feels like? I don't know if they allow you to do that or not.
No, I don't. I know I couldn't retake an exam I've taken, but all those exams are gone. But
Yes.
I don't think I could go back and retake or take LTAM because I had life contingencies. Perhaps I could take SRM because that's a new exam that I never had
Yeah.
going through the exam system. But I have no desire to do that because back to my original comment, I've got 30 great staff people,
Exactly.
and that's what they do, and they do it incredibly well. One of the guys, Tong, he's actually helps grade exams for the upper level exams and very connected at the SOA level. And he
Okay.
teaches at Drake. So we've got that connection with Drake. We've got the connection with the SOA. But at the end of the day, we get everything that we use to provide our materials off public information. So we have no inside information from the SOA.
Okay.
And they want to actually have talked with Stuart Klugman. He told me make sure that people know that.
Okay.
So I always try to emphasize that we do not have any inside information here. So
Yes.
what we know are things you could know, but we try to save you time by not having to read all that stuff. But it's all public information.
Okay. That's interesting. So a lot of it is then based on you look at the syllabus, you look at what the things they're releasing, that's public information, and then you guys dive in and really get the details of it worked out.
Yeah. So when they have new exams like IFM, LTAM, SRM, we're only going off of what the SOA releases as practice problems along
Okay.
with the syllabus. But we're very engaged. We take surveys, and thanks to all the students that respond to those surveys, so we get immediate feedback from students how our study questions kind of align with the syllabus. Are we too much weighted on theoretical questions or not enough theoretical questions? Do we need more loan problems or that type of feedback we get from
Okay.
students.
So you're able to kind of adjust then and get it, because I like that actually leads into my next question, because I feel like Adapt does a really good job of mimicking what an exam feels like. Once you get to a certain Adapt level, and I know you've developed that. It sounds like over a long period of time from the beginning. How has that changed over time? Do you feel like there was a certain year or time when it really became kind of golden and worked really well? I mean, because I feel like, obviously the student has to put in some effort, but when you put in that effort, Adapt it's a great product. So
Sure. Well, thank you. Well, if there's anyone listening that started off in 2009, feel free to send me a note because I think I owe you one. The system was good, and they told us this is a good idea and it works, but it was pretty rough, and nothing like it is today. I mean, if current customers saw it, they would be shocked as to the changes that have occurred. We are constantly improving on it, constantly making it better. We have 5 million exams taken, a little bit more than that now. And so talk about data that we can mine. So we
wow.
can
Yeah.
look at all that data of how students have taken exams. I'm wondering how many the SOA has in their question bank. I bet it might not be 5 million because
Yep.
students only take that exam once. We're here when
Exactly.
they take 5 or 6 exams. So even though we're not getting 100% of the candidates, we're getting 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 exams. So we've got a huge database of information, and we study that, and we make a science out of it, fine tuning that, and that's what those 30 people do, is trying to make that better.
Wow.
We've hired a contractor, and he's been with us about a year. And just a week ago in a meeting, he said, you guys have never put a pause button on making coaching actuaries better. He's seen how we're always trying to improve what we're doing, and we're making plans on, there's always room to grow, and we like doing that. So, we came out with a new update in the last couple of months. And we got plans for the future we're excited about. So it's just an ongoing process of improving.
That's amazing. Well, of those 5 million exams, I know that of the ones I took, I think I took like 20. I think I took like 20 exams per exam. So I took a lot more than 5 or 6.
Yep. We've had some that have taken 200 or 300.
Wow.
And
That
there's
would take
some
a long
power
time.
users out there, but we don't recommend that for anyone. But to each their own.
Yes, that's true. So in terms of like actually creating your database of questions, I'm sure it helps having a lot of employees now. Do you have people that focus on each different exam and they're
Yeah.
constantly developing new questions, or how do you come up with all these questions that are out there?
Right. Yeah, we got Team Tong and Team Terrence, and basically Team Tong takes care of the financial exams, and Team Terrence takes care of the data exams.
Okay.
Over the years, we've engaged a lot of third-party people to help us. Professors, experts in the field that have written questions. So we've got a lot of questions from those sources. But I'd say the last year or two, most of the questions have come from our own staff. So we've got a wide range. We really believe in the benefit of a variety. Paul Judd, who's a professor at Drake, told me about 7 or 8 years ago. He said that he's a professor over at Drake. He's connected with the SOA for Exam P, and he said you never want, even if you have the best person writing exams, you don't want to rely upon one person. You want to get a wide variety of different authors for your content. He said that's what we do at the SOA, and that's the best way to approach it. So I took that advice and tried to get a variety of styles of people authoring the questions.
That's great. So I mean, now obviously you've developed a lot of questions for these actuarial exams, but I also saw that you guys are branching out into the MCATs and the CFA exams. Has that been a challenge? Because your expertise obviously has been actuarial, but now I'm sure you can hire other people. But kind of how did that come about?
Yeah, that's a good question. Personally, I have little knowledge on both of those exams. However, we've had some of our actuaries go through the CFA process. Close to a half a dozen have either gone through it or going through it. So we have quite a bit of expertise on the CFA side. Mike Carmody is our lead, and he's just amazing. And so we've got the content down, and we've got great content writers on the MCAT. So the content we feel very good about. The challenge is that these are different markets, and we underestimated how different they were. We kind of thought at first we could use adapt is so successful, apply it to these other markets, and this will be successful. What we learned was it's not that easy.
Yeah.
And there's different markets, different people, and we're still learning how to adjust for those markets. But we feel really good about our content.
I believe that. That's interesting. So, how have you had those out there for very long now, or is that still kind of an ongoing process here?
Yeah, the CFA we've had, I think, about 5 years now, and then the MCAT 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
So they're still fairly young in the process, and they're both growing, but it's been a very a slower growth, more of a linear growth. Coaching actuaries was more of an exponential growth. So it takes a lot longer to grow linearly than it does exponentially. I know
that
you,
is
Paul,
true.
but
Yep. Little math here.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Little FM for you.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like in terms of like comparing the exams, like an actuarial exam compared to the MCAT. I know like the MCAT, I have at least one friend who's taking it right now, and there's just so many different topics on it. It, like is are they comparable at all, or are they just two vastly different types of
They're
exams?
totally different. And we also underestimated the challenge of developing a platform that really was good for all three. So in theory, they all took multiple choice exams.
Yeah,
So you use one, but there's a lot of difference in the nuances of it. And in order to be successful, we needed to program all those nuances. And we underestimated how much work that was going to be. So we're still learning that.
I believe that.
But that's one of the challenges we're facing.
Okay. So, do you have any advice for entrepreneurs, and especially actuarial entrepreneurs that are starting off, or even those that are still working and have a desire to start off? What's some of your best tips that you've learned over the years?
Well, I was thinking about that idea, and actually just last night I was brushing my teeth, and I recently got an electric toothbrush, and I started brushing, and I got it because my dentist recommended it, and she told me, like, okay, every 30 seconds it's going to beep, and then you move to a different side of your mouth, and after 2 minutes you're done. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And as I'm brushing, of course, I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking, what a great business model to have is you take something that's really important, like brushing your teeth, that that people probably don't do very well. They do it randomly. Everyone brushes
Yes.
differently, and you create a process to make it better, and you make it simple. You make it so everyone can follow, and you give them an ending point. So, like after 2 minutes, you're done. And if you can do that, you've accomplished a lot in an entrepreneurial business. I call that you've kind of figured out the X's of the business. But I think there's also random variable X's as well. And that's kind of like what we're experiencing on the CFA and the MCAT side is we got the good content, we got a good platform,
Yes.
there's a need out there. So we've got a solution that should, in theory, fit, but there's a mystery out there. There's a stochastic process, if you want to go that way, of understanding those markets. And that's the part that's usually the difficult part to figure out. And every business idea is going to be different. So you might get the product right, you might figure out the customer, but you got to deal with that random variable of unknowns that are out there. And you can't get married to an idea. And so if you're tied to an idea and became fixated on that solution, you'll never adapt and be able to adjust to the unknown. And so we're learning that we're having to always be adaptive to that unknown component that we're trying to figure out. So I guess the advice to them is come up with a good solution that checks off all those boxes, but then be ready to adapt to things that are really difficult to figure out, that
Yes.
seem to be more of a mystery than they are a science.
I think that's great advice. I mean, I've also heard people say, like, don't always think that the things that you need are what everyone else needs,
Mm-hmm.
and to really try to listen to people.
Right. Right. Get feedback.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, our surveys, again, thanks for everyone to answer that. That is so valuable to us. We get feedback because it allows us to understand what our customers are thinking, which may or may not be what we thought they were thinking.
I believe that. So I'd like to ask you for another piece of advice. This is one that I hear a lot, and that I've asked myself is, usually you have work, you have exams, and you have life.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of people say that only two of those can survive. And I want to hear your thoughts on the best way to balance those, because I mean, I sure struggled with that, and I know a lot of other people that do.
Sure. Yeah. I'm not necessarily the best role model if you look back in my life of answering that, to be honest, but I feel like I am much better now. So I'm getting better. And I think this is where I've learned a lot. I'd say maybe from the millennial generation, they do a much better job of that. And, I've appreciated that about them. And so I'm trying to learn about that. You want to come up with a study schedule. You want to study smart, but you also need to really have commitment from your family or whoever your friends are or whatever. You got to have their support, because if they're not supporting you, and you always kind of feel like you're robbing them by studying, that will never work. I was fortunate; my wife and family were very supportive of me, and so that made it much easier. But also, you need to look at your job, and hopefully you're getting study time. But if you're working 60 hours a week and then they
Yes.
give you study time, I always thought that was weird. Like, okay,
Yeah.
that's not any different than giving me 40 hours of work and no study time. And
I
so,
thought the same thing.
so you got to find an employer that understands the need to have balance, and try to hold them accountable to that. I was fortunate where my employer did that, but you might need to be proactive on that, and really have open conversations with them to put boundaries on your work. So put boundaries
Yes.
on your work, be on the same page with your family, and then try to study smart, and put together a schedule and try to stick with it.
I like it. Good advice. And then also, I mean, I know from knowing a lot of actuaries that consulting can tend to lend to more hours, and
Sure.
traditional insurance, you know, not that it still could lend to a lot of hours, but usually not as much as consulting. So maybe in the beginning days, maybe not as much consulting, and maybe do that later.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And you want to try to narrow your focus as much as you can, because it's too easy to broaden it. You get ideas and you think, oh, I could expand. But if it's going to take you away from being the best at something, then that's a opportunity cost that's going to be very costly. So
Very much,
you
yeah.
always have to, we actually got rid of a lot of every part of our business except, the exam prep part. And that's been the best thing we've done at coaching actuaries.
That's amazing. So now I know you probably have a million tips for passing exams, but I want to hear your number one top tip for everyone for
Number
passing
one,
exams.
little pressure here.
Yeah, exactly.
For me personally, I'm huge on understanding basic principles, because during the heat of an exam, you can't anticipate the questions they're going to ask, exactly. And you can't think too much on the fly. At least I couldn't. So
Yes.
I couldn't memorize my way through the exams. I had to understand the basic principles. And if I understood the basic principles, then I could adapt to the questions that they had on the exam. Also, it made it much easier to study. And so, like for FM, I looked at the basic principle there is, you got to identify the cash flows and you adjust for interest. And that's all of FM. It
Yes.
applies to loans, to bonds, to annuities, but that's all it was. And once you understood that and you got good at that, they could throw a question out there, and you're always asking yourself, okay, where are my cash flows and how do I adjust it for interest? And you realize that they may throw different business terms at you, but it's the same principles. And so if you can be an expert at that, not only will you be successful at that exam, then when you go to like LTAM and you find out, well, that's just identifying cash flows, adjusting for interest and probabilities. It's not a new exam. They're going to throw new terminology at you, but it really builds on what you learned from basic principles from FM and from P. So you'll forget less as you go from exam to exam, and you also remember more during the heat of an exam.
That's a great tip. I mean, I would say I found that to be true for myself, because I knew various people that would try to memorize specific problems, and that just does not work. I mean, you have to really just, if you understand how it works, then you can apply that to so many different types of problems, because it's always going to be different.
Right. And just on the recent LTM exam, they had a question on a detailed question on loan amortization. on LTM. This is an FM topic. And
Yeah.
if you just memorize that, you'd have no hope of answering that question on the
No.
exam.
Yep.
You understood the basic principles, was like, oh yeah, I remember how this works. This is, this is really quite straightforward. And you would have been able to answer that question.
Definitely. All right, Dave. Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour here, so I'm going to ask you 2 fun questions before before we're done here. I would like to know, and other people may like to know as well, what is your favorite hobby outside of work? Because obviously you like work. But...
I do, yeah, I do. I really love to do stuff with my family. That's great. I got 4 grandkids, love them all.
Awesome.
And but if I'm out on my own, I really like to go hiking. Outdoor stuff. I love running. Anything that involves movement and outdoors and nature. I want to be there. And lately, I've actually developed a new hobby. At least it is for me, and that is math, and which seems like more of a business, but it's more what I call fun math, not actuarial math.
Okay.
So I'm reading about Euler and Riemann and all these guys, and
oh wow,
going back to trigonometry and solving triangle problems and having a blast. Doing it with other people too, which is more.
That's fun. Awesome.
So those are some of the things I enjoy doing in my spare time.
You are right up my alley. I mean, I love hiking as well. I love math, obviously. I think most people that go into actuarial like math to some extent, at least. But yeah, in terms of the hiking, I mean, so I'm in Spokane, Washington, and it's beautiful around here. Mm-hmm. So, have you ever gone backpacking?
Oh yeah. I've like gone down and up the Grand Canyon.
That's amazing.
I go with we call this our A team. There's Brian, the guy that started the company, and then Mike, who does our CFA and IFM exams, and then Don Lyons, who's another actuary. The 4 of us, we go out about every 2 years and just do crazy things. And we went down and up the Grand Canyon in one day, which I can still remember.
Oh, that's intense.
With Don, and he's one of those kind of rule followers. And he was looking at it and says, they say we're not supposed to do this. And Mike and I, we kind of are adventure people. And we thought, well, we think that's just a suggestion.
Okay, yeah.
No, it's not a suggestion. So, we went down and up the same day, and we survived.
Wow.
But I don't recommend that necessarily for other people, but it was a lot of fun.
That's intense. I've never done it. I've hiked the Grand Canyon one time, and it was just a day hike, so it was like I went down, I think most of the way to the Colorado River and then back up, but I didn't have a backpack or anything. It was and even that was hard enough.
Oh, we didn't really have backpacks. That was another. We didn't plan too much. We had a little water, and we had a granola bar, and that was about it.
Wow.
So when you say a backpacking, that's almost too much work for me to prepare. I'll take a camel, or I'll take a, fanny pack or something like that.
There you go.
Minimalistic is my motto.
I like it. That's awesome. So where is your favorite spot that you've ever traveled to?
I've traveled a decent amount. I don't really have a favorite spot. Maybe Grand Canyon. For me, it's much more about who I'm with. And anytime I can travel with my wife, my family, my A team, that's what I want to do. I always want to go somewhere where it's outside and active. If I don't like to go sitting in a museum or touristy places. So, I've been to Spain. That was cool. But I don't really have I probably would say the Grand Canyon. It's just because of adventure and the beauty. Or we hiked Long's Peak in Colorado once. And Mike and I made it to the top. That was amazing. So that was something I'll never forget.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's there's so many cool places to travel. So that's a good answer.
Okay. Well, very good.
Well, we're kind of at the end here, so I wanted to thank you very much for joining, and this was very helpful for me to hear, and I'm sure everyone else who is watching. So I appreciate you coming on.
Well, good. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate you taking the time, Paul. And thanks to all of our customers who are listening.
For sure. And yes, so I'm out from. Oh, and also, if you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to the channel because I have more people coming on, and they're fun interviews. So I think it's fun to, you know, even when you get a whole bunch of different types of actuaries, you just get a different perspective from different people. So
Right. Yeah,
so I really enjoyed.
yeah, sorry for interrupting. I'll just echo. It's Paul's really an interesting guy, and we've had a lot of conversations before this. And I highly recommend your channel to others who are interested in becoming an actuary.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Dave. So I'm out from Spokane, Washington. Dave is out from, is it Des Moines, Iowa, where you're at?
Yeah.
Des Moines, Iowa. And we will see you all next time.
Okay. Bye.